October 30th, 1918. The deck of HMS Agamemnon off the coast of the Ottoman Empire. The salt-stiffened deck of the British battleship groans as it rolls in the gray waters of the Aegean Sea. The air is cold, carrying the scent of damp wool, coal smoke, and a profound, exhausted relief. For the men gathered here, British, French, Ottoman, the guns on the Western Front have been silent for less than 3 weeks. But here, in the shadow of the fallen Sublime Port, another war is ending. Aboard the Agamemnon, an Ottoman delegation, faces drawn with defeat and hunger, signs the armistice of Mudrose. The Ottoman Empire, a colossus that had straddled 3 continents for 6 centuries, is dead. But on the dusty streets of Damascus, the mood is not of mourning, but of euphoric anticipation. The air there is thick with the scent of jasmine and gunpowder, not salt spray. Arab fighters, their keffiyehs stained with sweat and dust, stream into the city. They are warriors of the Arab revolt, led by the charismatic Faisal ibn Hussein, son of the Sharif of Mecca. They fought alongside the legendary British officer T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, against their Ottoman overlords. They believed they fought for a sovereign Arab kingdom, a unified nation from Aleppo to Aden, promised to them in the fiery correspondence with the British High Commissioner Sir Henry McMahon. In London and Paris, however, the maps tell a different story. In the smoke-filled rooms of Whitehall and the Quai d'Orsay, the air is thick with cigar smoke and realpolitik. The men here, men like British Prime Minister David Lloyd George and French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, do not dream of Arab independence. They see a vacuum, a carcass of empire, and they intend to carve it. Their tool is not a sword, but a secret agreement signed years earlier in the midst of the war's desperate fog. They call it the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Picture the map. May 1916. A junior British diplomat, Sir Mark Sykes, and his French counterpart, François-Georges Picot, lean over a map of the Middle East. With a grease pencil, they draw lines. Not along ridges of mountains or banks of rivers, but straight, ruthless, arbitrary lines across the desert. Blue for France, taking control of modern-day Syria, Lebanon, northern Iraq. Red for Britain, securing the corridor from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, including Palestine, Jordan, and southern Iraq. A brown zone around Jerusalem for international administration. These are not borders for nations. They are lines of imperial convenience, dividing the Arab world into spheres of influence, zones of control. It is a colonial blueprint, drawn in stark contradiction to the promises made to the Arabs. Now in 1918, Faisal enters Damascus as a liberator. He establishes an Arab government, believing the great powers will honor their word. He sends his aide, a young man named Rustam Haydar, to the coast. Haydar's mission is to raise the Arab flag in the liberated coastal cities. But in Beirut, he is met not by cheering crowds, but by the sight of French warships in the harbor and French troops on the docks. A French officer politely, firmly, informs him that the region is under French mandate. The Arab flag will not fly here. The betrayal is not yet a public scandal. It is a quiet, brutal fact on a Beirut pier. The dream of unity shatters on the rocks of a prior, secret commitment. The Arab world, having thrown off one empire, is now to be divided between 2 others. The stage is set not for a birth of a nation, but for a century of conflict. January 1919. The Hall of Mirrors, Palace of Versailles, France. Sunlight, weak and wintry, slants through the towering windows of the most opulent room in Europe, glancing off acres of gilded ornament and the anxious faces of the world's most powerful men. The air is heavy with the scent of polish, old stone, and the immense weight of decisions that will reshape the planet. The Paris Peace Conference has begun. Among the suited and uniformed Western statesmen, Wilson, Lloyd George, Clemenceau, walks a figure who seems from another world. Prince Faisal, dressed in the white silk and gold braid of an Arab prince, his sharp, intelligent eyes taking in the splendor. He is here to plead his case, to translate the desert victories of the Arab revolt into diplomatic reality at the table of victors. But he is an anomaly, a romantic symbol in a room of cold calculators. He brings with him the memory of promises and the hope of President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, particularly the resonant principle of self-determination. Yet, as he soon discovers, the whispers of Sykes-Picot are louder in these corridors than the public proclamations of liberty. Clemenceau views Syria not as a nation in waiting, but as a rightful French possession, a terre de mission. Lloyd George is sympathetic to Faisal personally, but is shackled by Britain's imperial strategy and its new, desperate obsession. A promise made in another secret document, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, pledging British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Watch Faisal in these rooms. He is fluent, dignified, and outmatched. He negotiates directly with Clemenceau. For a moment there seems a glimmer of compromise, a France with economic rights in Syria perhaps, but Arab political autonomy. But the machinery of imperialism grinds on. The conference creates the mandate system, a mechanism of the new League of Nations. It is dressed in the language of tutelage, of preparing peoples not yet able to stand by themselves for independence. To the Arab delegates, it is a transparent fiction, colonialism under a new, benevolent name. Syria and Lebanon are assigned as a Class A mandate to France. Palestine, Transjordan, and Iraq are assigned to Britain. The betrayal crystallizes not in a treaty, but in a slow, agonizing series of pronouncements. In Damascus, Faisal is proclaimed king of a Syrian Arab kingdom in March 1920, a last, defiant assertion of the McMahon Promise. The response from the West is not recognition, but a directive. In April 1920, at the San Remo Conference, the Allied Supreme Council formally awards the mandates. The Arab kingdom is rendered illegitimate by imperial fiat. Then comes the ultimatum. From General Henry Gouraud, the one-armed French veteran who now commands the Armée du Levant, to King Faisal in Damascus. The demands are impossible. Disband the Arab army, accept the French mandate in full, surrender all military equipment. Faisal, trapped, prevaricates. But his young, fiery defense minister, Yusuf al-Azma, refuses to submit. With a tiny, ill-equipped force of regulars and Bedouin volunteers, he marches out to confront the modern French army advancing from the coast. The clash is not a battle. It is a sacrifice. July 24, 1920, the Battle of Maysalun Pass, west of Damascus. Here, under the blistering sun, the abstract treachery of diplomacy becomes concrete. Al-Azma's men, some armed only with antique rifles, face French tanks, airplanes, and heavy artillery. The fight is as short as it is brutal. Yusuf al-Azma falls, killed in action, becoming an instant and eternal martyr. The French columns roll into Damascus. General Gouraud, in a calculated act of symbolic conquest, goes to the tomb of Saladin, the great unifier of Arabs against the Crusaders. He places his hand on the tomb and is said to declare, "Awake, Saladin, we have returned. My presence here consecrates the victory of the cross over the crescent." The message is not lost on a single Arab soul. The promise of unity dies at Maysalun, not with a treaty signature, but with the tread of tank tracks on the road to Damascus. The imperial map has been imposed by force. The lines in the sand are now borders drawn in blood. Cairo, 1921. The Semiramis Hotel overlooking the Nile. The ceiling fans stir the humid air in the office of Sir Winston Churchill, then Britain's colonial secretary. Spread before him on a heavy oak table is not a map of nations, but a ledger of imperial burden. The Middle East is bleeding Britain dry. A massive rebellion is raging in Iraq against British rule. In Palestine, Jewish immigration and Arab anxiety are sparking violent clashes. Churchill has convened a secret conference of British regional experts, the 40 Thieves as they're wryly called, with one urgent mandate: to redraw the map on the cheap, to make empire affordable. Watch Churchill, cigar in hand, point to the vast, costly territory of the British mandate for Mesopotamia. "We are paying millions for a desert," he grumbles. His solution is not liberation, but reorganization. With the stroke of a pen, he creates a new entity, the Kingdom of Iraq. And he installs a king, Faisal, the recently deposed king of Syria, now a stateless exile. It is a cynical, brilliant move. Faisal is a Sunni Arab with no connection to Iraq's Shiite majority or Kurdish north, making him dependent on British support. To placate the French, Churchill agrees to sever the entire eastern bank of the Jordan River from the Palestine Mandate, creating a new artificial entity, the Emirate of Transjordan. He gives it to Faisal's brother, Abdullah, as a consolation prize. In one conference, Churchill invents two nations, anoints two kings, and sets the demographic and political powder kegs that will define the modern Middle East. A Sunni minority ruling over a Shiite majority in Iraq. A Palestinian homeland arbitrarily split in two, Kurdish aspirations ignored. Now shift the scene to the hills of Lebanon and the ancient cities of Syria. Here, the French are conducting their own, even more brutal social surgery. General Gouraud and his successors believe in divide et impera, divide and rule. They look at the complex tapestry of religious and ethnic groups and see not a society, but a problem to be managed by fragmentation. They carve Greater Lebanon out of Syrian territory, creating a state with a fragile, engineered Christian majority. Within Syria itself, they attempt to break the national spirit by hacking the country into mini-states. A state of Damascus, a state of Aleppo, and most tellingly, an Alawite state along the coast and a Jabal Druze state in the south. They are playing with primordial forces, weaponizing sectarian identity, telling populations they are not Syrian but Alawite, Druze, Christian first. They recruit minority groups into their colonial troops, the troop spatials, planting seeds of communal distrust that will bear poisonous fruit for generations. And in Jerusalem, the third, parallel betrayal deepens. The British mandate in Palestine is a pressure cooker. Arab farmers watch as Jewish settlers, armed with funds and British permits, purchase large tracts of land from absentee Arab landlords. The fellahin, the peasants, are evicted, their connection to the soil, the core of their identity, severed. They see the Balfour Declaration not as a vague promise, but as an active project of displacement. British officials, trapped by their contradictory promises to Arabs and Zionists, respond to Arab protests with harsh repression and to Jewish demands with bureaucratic facilitation. The 1929 riots over access to the Western Wall, the 1936-1939 Arab Revolt. Each explosion is met with British bullets and commissions of inquiry that change nothing. The mandate becomes a machine for generating mutual resentment and violence. The British, who promised the Arabs a kingdom and promised the Jews a homeland, have instead created a zero-sum game for a single, bitterly contested land. By the mid-1930s, the imperial blueprint is complete. The Middle East is a puppet theater. Kings installed by London rule in Baghdad and Amman. A French high commissioner dictates to a fractured Syria. In Palestine, British soldiers patrol between two increasingly hostile populations. The natural economic and cultural unity of the region, the caravan routes between Aleppo and Mosul, the shared intellectual life of Damascus and Baghdad, is strangled by customs barriers and political borders. The nations created were not born of popular will or geographic logic, but of imperial exhaustion and the ruthless calculus of control. The fuses, laid along every arbitrary border and in every aggravated sectarian fault line, are now connected. All that is needed is the spark of a coming world war. May 14, 1948. Tel Aviv Museum of Art, British Mandate of Palestine. The air inside the modest hall is electric, thick with the sweat of anticipation and the ghost of recent horrors. Outside, the British are leaving. The last High Commissioner, Sir Alan Cunningham, has already boarded a ship at Haifa. The Union Jack is being lowered, not in an orderly transfer of power, but in a weary, strategic retreat from an ungovernable land. Inside, David Ben-Gurion, his voice firm but weary, reads the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel. The room erupts. For the Jewish people, it is the miraculous end of exile. For the Arab world, it is the Nakba, the catastrophe, the final, devastating harvest of seeds sown by Sykes-Picot, Churchill, and the mandates. This is not a spontaneous war. It is the inevitable collapse of the imperial order. The Arab armies of Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon invade, not as a unified force, but as rival monarchies and fledgling republics, each with its own agenda, their borders and very existence the products of that same betrayal. King Abdullah of Transjordan wants the West Bank, not a Palestinian state. Egypt's King Farouk seeks regional prestige. There is no coordinated command, no shared strategy, only the brittle, fragmented politics the Europeans engineered. And against them stands a unified, desperate Israeli force. The result is a seismic event that reshapes the human and political geography of the region, the displacement of over 700,000 Palestinians. Their exodus creates a desperate, nationless people and a central, burning injustice that will fuel the region's politics for decades, a permanent, open wound. Now pan back across the map. The post-war world sees the final, reluctant retreat of direct European control, but the structures remain. In 1949, a series of coups topples the old, European installed order in Syria. Each new junta is more fiercely nationalist, more bitterly resentful of the colonial borders that hem them in. In Iraq, the monarchy Britain built is overthrown in a bloody 1958 revolution. The new strongmen, like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, rise to power on a promise of pan-Arab unity, a direct, furious rejection of the fractured map drawn in Paris and Cairo. But the Sykes-Picot borders proved diabolically resilient. When Egypt and Syria briefly unite in the United Arab Republic in 1958, it collapses in 3 years, shattered by regional rivalries and internal suspicions the French and British had baked into the system. The colonial legacy becomes a tool-kit for the new autocrats. The minority Alawites, whom the French elevated and armed, seize control of the Syrian military, and by 1970, the state itself under Hafez al-Assad, ruling a Sunni-majority country with a sectarian security apparatus straight out of the French playbook. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein, a Sunni from Tikrit, uses the British-crafted state to brutally suppress the Shiite majority and the Kurds, whose aspirations for a homeland were ignored at every imperial drawing board. The borders, drawn for administrative convenience, become iron cages, containing explosive sectarian and ethnic demographics that dictators must violently control to survive. And in the sand and rock of the desert, another European creation fuels the fire, the modern state system itself, with its concept of absolute sovereignty over territory. When oil is discovered, the vast wealth does not flow to peoples, but to these new artificial states, to the regimes that control the capital cities on the colonial maps. It makes the borders worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth killing for. It turns regional competition into existential struggle. The 1980-1988 Iran-Iraq War, a clash of nationalism and sectarianism, is fought over a disputed river border drawn by British advisors. Every subsequent conflict, the Gulf War, the 2003 Iraq invasion, the Syrian civil war is, in part, a violent negotiation over the post-Ottoman order imposed a century before. The final, tragic irony is this: the Middle East that is often described as broken was assembled this way. It was not an ancient, primordial chaos awaiting order. It was ordered by outsiders for their own ends. The betrayal was not a single act at Mudrose or San Remo, but a process. The cynical promises, the secret treaties, the arbitrary borders, the cynical manipulation of sectarian identity, and the final abdication of responsibility. The region did not fail the promise of the modern state system. The state system, as imposed, failed the region. The men on the Agamemnon in the Hall of Mirrors and at the Cairo conference did not just draw lines on a map. They drafted a blueprint for a century of conflict whose reverberations still shake the world today. The Middle East is not broken. It was built this way.